Chapter 1. After the divorce, I ended up sleeping with a delicate young master from a noble family. Afterwards, he cried even harder than I did. I had no choice but to put my clothes back on and comfort him. At that moment, he was stark naked, shyly whispering in my ear, asking me to take responsibility. Outwardly, I casually agreed to marry him, but inwardly, I was already plotting my escape. It wasn't until the imperial decree for marriage arrived at the general's manor that I realized I was the one who had fallen into a trap all along. I, Victoria Nolan, had not only slept with a man but also had to console him afterward. My head throbbed as if it were splitting apart while I dressed and tried to calm the young master. The young master sobbed uncontrollably. I'm no longer pure. I hurried to reassure him, you are. Both of us are still pure. Yet he continued to cry, my parents already despise me for failing to find a wife, and now, I fear no one will ever agree to marry me. Wasn't that just perfect? I, too, couldn't find a husband. My eyes flickered with a hint of calculation as I continued to console him, it's fine. I'll marry you. It was just an offhand remark to pacify him for now. The young master choked out a question, really? I replied, more real than solid gold, I swear. No sooner had I spoken than the door to the room was kicked open. The young master reacted quickly, diving under the blanket. I mischievously tugged at a strand of his long hair, letting it peek out from under the blanket. In response, the young master extended his slender, fair hand to tuck all his hair back in. What a bashful little young master. I turned to see two women with their hair styled like married ladies storming into the room. Suspicion arose in my heart. Didn't the young master's servant claim he was unmarried? The taller woman raised an eyebrow and smiled at the one dressed in palace attire standing beside her. The timing is perfect. The woman in palace attire gave a slight nod. The taller one approached me, grabbed my hand, and spoke warmly, sister-in-law, you're truly our dear sister-in-law. Thank you for humbling yourself to save this aging bachelor. Her words came so quickly and fervently that I couldn't get a word in edgewise. Don't worry. Tomorrow, I'll come to your residence to formally propose. Rest assured, my brother is entirely willing. Chloe, do you think that's right? Yes, elder brother has definitely taken a liking to sister-in-law. Even if he hasn't, we still have ways to ensure they get married. At worst, we can have Old Windsor request the emperor to grant the marriage. The tall woman squinted her eyes and smiled, exactly right. If His Majesty doesn't grant the marriage, I'll enter the harem and plead with the Empress to issue the decree. No matter what, this marriage must happen. My face turned from red to pale. What are they talking about? What's all this about the Emperor and Empress? I don't understand a thing. Their words were completely different from what Lambert's servant, Emoshu, told me. Yesterday, Emoshu took my 100-tael silver note, patted his chest, and assured me every word he said was true. He claimed that his master came from a diligent, scholarly family and currently held a leisurely fourth-rank official position. He said the two young ladies of the household had already married Taoist priests, and the young master was just a bookworm who only knew how to read. I asked him about the young master's status in the family. Emoshu looked sorrowful, sighed heavily, and replied, the eldest young lady is domineering and arrogant, the second young lady abuses her power, and the lord and madam favor daughters over sons. My young master lives a miserable life. Hearing this, I sighed along with him and asked if the young master had ever discussed marriage. Emoshu immediately wiped his tears and choked out, the lord and madam dislike the young master, and the young master himself doesn't care much about marriage matters. To this day, he hasn't been engaged. He's very clean, not even having a chambermaid to serve him. So clean, could it be that he's a cutsleeve? Emoshu startled and shouted, our young master is absolutely not the kind of person who likes men. I'm already married, General, please don't look at me with those eyes. At that moment, hearing Emoshu's words, my heart couldn't help but ache. I just wanted to immediately marry young Master Lambert. Compared to young Master Lambert, my family background was not just a little better. My family had been rooted in the capital for many years, considered a small but notable noble family. My father was a third-rank general, my eldest brother a fourth rank, and my second brother a fifth rank. My eldest sister-in-law was the only daughter of the great general, and my second sister-in-law was the second daughter of a marquis. In the family, I was the only daughter, and my parents, brothers, and sisters-in-law all treated me very well. As for myself, thanks to my brave achievements in battle, the emperor personally issued an edict granting me the title of fifth-rank General of Valor. It must be said, I was the first woman to be granted the rank of general in this dynasty. Young Master Lambert was gentle and weak, while I was strong and capable. We were truly a perfect match. To be honest, I had even planned out how to prevent young Master Lambert from developing second thoughts, how to help him gain favor in the family, and how to deal with those two fierce little sisters-in-law of his. But unexpectedly, that damned Imosu lied. Someone tell me, just what kind of person did I end up sleeping with? It's all Keith Turner's fault. If he hadn't taken a concubine to spite me, I wouldn't have divorced him. If I hadn't divorced him, my mother wouldn't have pressured me to remarry. If I hadn't remarried, I wouldn't have casually gotten involved with young Master Lambert. In a rush to escape the room, I climbed over the Turner family wall, covered Keith Turner's head, and gave him a thorough beating. Keith Turner was once my husband. We were betrothed even before birth, and as soon as I reached the age of marriage, my mother urged me to return to the capital to wed. I returned to the capital, but it was to break off the engagement. Unexpectedly, the Turner family had already fallen into decline and refused to annul the engagement. Keith Turner, however, had the refined and scholarly appearance that I liked. Being someone who admired beauty, I agreed to the Turner family's proposal. As a result, just as we were about to consummate the marriage, urgent news of war arrived at the door. Keith Turner gently helped me put my clothes back on and promised to wait for my return to the capital. I also instructed him to remain pure and wait for me. The women at the border often said that a man who has been tainted is even more unbearable than a foul-smelling ditch. I had no desire to share a bed with a defiled man. Keith Turner remained silent for a long time, saying nothing. I assumed he had tacitly agreed, so I donned my armor and joined the army on the battlefield. One departure lasted 3 years. When I triumphantly returned to the capital, Keith Turner stood at the door holding a child in his arms, with several concubines behind him to greet me. I was so furious that my head spun. Large green hats seemed to spin around on top of my head. Before I could even savor the joy of my return, he had already turned into a foul-smelling ditch. Leaping off my horse, I snatched the child from Keith Turner's arms, handed it to my deputy, and whipped him mercilessly. The concubines, sensing the situation, immediately took small steps backward. Keith Turner cried out miserably as I beat him, calling to the heavens and wailing to the earth. When his clothes were nearly shredded by my whip, the Turner family servants finally dared to intervene. Keith Turner's father pointed at me, furiously yelling, "Vicious woman! Vicious woman! The Turner family doesn't need you." Keith Turner, not yet knocked unconscious, chimed in, "That's right, report her to the authorities. Arrest her." The authorities were alerted, but I wasn't arrested. Having just achieved a major military victory, I was a female general personally appointed by the emperor. The magistrate of the capital had no choice but to handle the matter superficially, avoiding offending either side. In the end, the case was ruled as a divorce. The Turner family was dissatisfied, still coveting my title as general. I gave Keith Turner a few more beatings. He was so terrified of me that, in secret, he wrote a divorce letter without his family's knowledge. With the divorce paper in hand, I reclaimed all the betrothal gifts and strode back home with a commanding air. My father, who had accompanied me back to the capital, rushed to the Turner residence demanding justice as soon as he heard of the divorce. Keith Turner was beaten by my father until he was half paralyzed. From then on, the Turner family and my family became sworn enemies. Half a month later, Keith Turner remarried, taking his cousin as his bride. His family whispered behind my back, calling me a jealous woman, claiming no one would dare marry me. My mother was so furious she kicked me out of the house, shouting, "Go find me a son-in-law. If you can't find one, at least bring back a child." Find one? Where on earth am I supposed to look? Adding up all the time, I've spent less than 3 months in the capital, how could I possibly know anyone? With no other option, I spent my days sitting on the second floor of a tea house, gazing out the window in search of a husband. And indeed, I found someone. That young man, with his rosy lips and pearly teeth, had an innocent look about him. Every day, he would stroll down the street, making a single round. On the third day, I followed him and saw with my own eyes as he and his servant entered a bookstore. So, he turned out to be a bookworm. Coming from a family that values martial arts, I had grown accustomed to seeing rugged fighters. Yet, I had a particular fondness for delicate scholars. Once I decided, I acted immediately. I knocked out his servant and interrogated him thoroughly. The servant's eyes lit up at the sight of my silver banknotes, his gaze following my every move. With my persuasion, he agreed to lure the young master to meet me. Disguised in men's clothing and holding a rare book, I waited for the young master to appear. "A cup of wine in exchange for a rare book," I said. The young master's eyes sparkled, and he eagerly drank it all. But as the wine settled in his stomach, he grew dizzy and lost his senses. The servant slipped away, leaving his young master in my care. Emboldened by the wine, I spent the night with the young master. Little did I know, that one night would lead to a huge complication. Chapter 2. The next morning, while I was still dreaming, I was jolted awake by my mother's close maidservant. Nanny Nolan leaned close to my ear and whispered, "Eldest miss, you've caused a big problem." Startled, I sat up fully awake and asked, "What big problem?" "The Lambert family has sent someone to propose marriage," she replied. The Lambert family? Had they really come to propose? I glanced out the window, the sky was still dim. "Who proposes marriage this early in the morning?" I muttered. Nanny Nolan sighed heavily, "It's the Lambert family." I yawned and asked again, "Why did they come so early to propose?" Nanny Nolan waved her hand dismissively, "Who knows?" Clearly intentional. Just after the hour of the rabbit, they arrived at the door, bumping right into the master as he was preparing to head to court. If you ask me, there's no way this wasn't deliberate. I rolled my eyes and continued, "And then what happened?" Nanny Nolan sighed again, "Haze. Stop with the haze already, and get to the point." Nanny Nolan wiped imaginary sweat from her forehead and said, "Young lady, before belittling someone, did you even bother to learn about the eldest son of the Lambert family?" How could I not have looked into it? I spent 100 taels of silver just to investigate. The Lambert family is just a small household in the capital, but their 2 daughters married exceptionally well. One became the wife of Edward Spencer, your maternal uncle, and the other married Prince Henry Windsor. Those 2 shining stars in the family were both claimed by the Lamberts. Young lady, if you must belittle someone, why does it have to be the eldest son of the Lambert family? I was at a loss for words, trying to defend myself. Their servant said the 2 daughters married monks, so I didn't think much of it. Nanny Nolan sighed again. Uncle Edward Spencer and Prince Henry Windsor were originally Taoist priests, but they descended the mountain and started families. No blame on you, you grew up on the frontier and are unaware of the treachery within the capital. If you had just asked one more person, you would have understood the Lambert family's situation. The more Nurse Nolan spoke, the more my confidence wavered, my head drooping so low it nearly touched my chest. Right now, don't worry about the Lambert family anymore. When I arrived, the general was already so furious that he went into the ancestral hall to fetch the whip. So why didn't you tell me earlier? As soon as Nurse Nolan finished speaking, I hastily threw on an outer robe, leapt onto the beams, and prepared to remove the tiles to escape. Nurse Nolan immediately shouted toward the main door, "Someone help. The eldest young lady doesn't want to take responsibility and is trying to run away." With a loud bang, the door to the room was kicked open. My father stormed in, whip in hand. This is the end for me. Wearing his court attire, my father struck me with the whip, sending me crashing to the ground, landing awkwardly like a dog eating dirt. Nurse Nolan quietly slipped away along the base of the wall. My father, consumed with rage, lashed the whip down hard beside me, sending up clouds of dust. Cough, cough, cough. Can we talk this through, father? What are you trying to do? Without a shred of mercy, my father struck me again with the whip. I told you to find someone yourself to remarry, not to coerce an honest man. Heaven and earth bear witness, I didn't coerce anyone. I didn't even use any medicine. I didn't, nothing is impossible. The wife of the Duke's brother-in-law has already spoken, Lambert. Young Master Lambert. My father seemed at a loss for words and immediately changed the subject, scolding me directly, "You ungrateful girl. Just wait, today I'll give you a proper beating." The whip cracked loudly, snap, snap, but not once did it land on me. Poor chairs in my room, though, they all ended up with broken legs and arms from my father's strikes. Deep down, I felt smug. My father was nothing more than a paper tiger, unwilling to truly harm me. But one sentence from him shattered all my illusions. "Don't think I won't dare to hit you. If it weren't for the Duke's wife waiting for your answer, I would have beaten you to death today. Go wash your face, tidy yourself up, and meet the guests in the front hall. Stay put in the house and wait until I return from court duties. Then I'll deal with you further." I immediately scrambled to my feet like an obedient child, nodding repeatedly in agreement. "All right, no problem at all. Please go handle your work, I'll wait for you to come back." My father snorted, put away the whip, and walked out of the room. After he left, my mother sent people to urge me no less than 10 times. Half an hour later, Nurse Nolan personally came to hurry me along. I just remembered I haven't washed my face yet. Nurse Nolan, as if performing magic, pulled out a handkerchief from somewhere. "It's damp and ready, my lady. Please use it." Unwilling to give in, I continued making excuses. "I haven't combed my hair yet." Nurse Nolan waved dismissively. "My lady has never combed her hair before. This outfit doesn't look good." Nurse Nolan pouted. "Your wardrobe only has this one set of women's clothing." There was no longer any reason to avoid it, so I had no choice but to follow Nurse Nolan to the main hall. The main hall was far livelier compared to my room. The tall woman I met yesterday was happily chatting with my mother, holding a little girl in her arms. That child, with her rosy cheeks and adorable features, looked like a finely carved jade statue. Taking a closer look, the little girl bore a striking resemblance, about 5 parts, to the young master I had shared a bed with. At that thought, my legs nearly gave out, and I almost collapsed on the spot. Seeing me arrive, the tall woman gently set the little girl down and stood up to greet me. "Sister-in-law, General." I nodded slightly in return. Once I sat down, the tall woman smiled and introduced herself. "Yesterday's events happened so suddenly that I didn't have the chance to properly introduce myself to the General. I am from the Lambert family, given name Nina. I have an elder brother and a younger sister. Both my sister and I are already married. My elder brother loves reading above all else. His heart belongs to books, he's a genuine bookworm. I hope the General won't hold that against him." Inwardly, I let out a cold scoff. Caught red-handed in bed, would I even dare to hold that against him? My brother has kept himself pure for many years, but yesterday, sensing the precarious direction of the conversation, I immediately interrupted her. "If Madam has something to say, speak plainly. We warriors aren't fond of beating around the bush." Nina Lambert smiled brightly, her face blooming like a flower. "Proposals should typically be handled by the elders, but last night my mother was so overjoyed, no, distraught, that she stayed up all night. Thus, I've come in her place." "Oh, my brother is simple-minded and has never even held a woman's hand." Enough. You don't need to say any more." I agree, all right?" I asked her to speak no more. With every word Nina Lambert uttered, my mother's sharp gaze pierced through me like daggers. A moment later, Nina Lambert left behind a pile of gifts, beamed brightly, and departed. As for me, I was punished to kneel in the ancestral hall for the entire afternoon. Before my father returned from court, taking advantage of no one noticing, I slipped away. Ridiculous, my mother at most would only make me kneel, but my father's whip would truly leave marks on my legs. I climbed the wall into the Lambert estate, wanting to take a closer look at my future fiancé, but even more so to deal with the servant, Mo Shu, who had deceived me and stolen my banknotes. Mo Shu hadn't spoken a single truthful word, claiming that his young master resided in the worst quarters. So I deliberately sought out the best courtyard and entered. Sure enough, as soon as I climbed up onto the roof, I overheard voices inside. "Young master, do you think this plan will work?" The one speaking was none other than Mo Shu, the very person who had swindled my silver. And the young master, who had been crying in my arms just yesterday, now looked entirely smug. Why wouldn't it work? She's ruined my reputation, how could she not marry me now? Mo Shu muttered under his breath, a man doesn't even have a reputation to ruin. The Lambert young master knocked Mo Shu on the head with a cup. What do you know? If I say I have one, then I do. So, yesterday he was acting? Deliberately setting a trap for me? I was so furious I could feel steam rising from my head, not realizing someone had approached me from behind. "General, were you eavesdropping?" I was so startled that I almost fell off the roof. The person quickly grabbed me, their expression as if enjoying a good show. With a glance, I found them oddly familiar, like I had seen them somewhere before. Before I could ask, they revealed themselves. "General, you are truly bold, this prince is impressed." This prince? Let's see, who in the Lambert household dares to call themselves this prince? Answer, Prince Henry Windsor. Prince Henry Windsor smiled slyly, like a fox. "My brother-in-law is as pure as a white lotus, once the general has touched him, you cannot abandon him halfway." I was so furious I laughed. What is the prince talking about? You heard that conversation too. Does the eldest son of the Lambert family need me to get involved? Prince Henry Windsor feigned innocence. "My brother-in-law is truly unlucky. Of all places to have a conversation, why must it be in my princess's courtyard?" What? This courtyard isn't the eldest son of the Lambert families? Seeing my skepticism, Prince Henry Windsor pointed toward the shabbiest courtyard in the Lambert household. "There, that's actually your brother-in-law's courtyard." I raised an eyebrow and asked, "So, Prince Henry Windsor, why are you eavesdropping from the rooftop? At your wife's house, is there really a need to climb onto the roof?" Prince Henry Windsor's expression turned slightly melancholic. I misspoke and was kicked out of the courtyard by the princess. Sure enough, not long after, a woman's voice came from inside the room. It was Nina Lambert, the one who came to propose marriage at my house today. "Big brother, can you stop acting so pathetic? Men need to maintain some pride, only then will women love them." Prince Henry Windsor immediately chimed in, exactly, Big brother must be a little more proud." From the rooftop, Prince Henry Windsor pondered deeply, "Does the princess think I lack pride? Seems like I'll have to learn how to carry myself better from now on." I rolled my eyes in exasperation. Climbing onto the roof to eavesdrop, only to end up being fed a dose of couple's affection. Inside the room, the voice of young Master Lambert rang out again, "Second sister, third sister, you've worked hard scheming for me. I have a few rare books here, if you don't mind, you can." Nina Lambert quickly interrupted, "No, don't. We're not interested in those things." Prince Henry Windsor also chimed in, exactly, we're not interested." After that, they continued chatting about trivial family matters, none of which concerned me. Prince Henry Windsor and I reached a gentleman's agreement, promising not to expose each other's secrets. Then, I headed to an inn to spend the night. Until my father calms down, I absolutely dare not return home. Chapter 3. After Keith Turner was beaten up again by the hooded man, I finally felt at ease returning home. Sure enough, my father's anger had subsided. It seemed he was just like me, finding a punching bag to vent his frustration. With my father's fury gone, I leisurely lounged at home, waiting for the Lambert family to come and propose a second time. I pondered for a long time and decided that this time, I must firmly reject them. Unexpectedly, the Lambert family didn't even give me the chance to refuse. 10 days later, an imperial decree of marriage arrived at our residence. The emperor had decreed a union between me and the eldest son of the Lambert family, Thomas Lambert. The wedding date was set for a month later. Honestly, if it weren't an imperial decree, I would have torn it into pieces without hesitation. That man is truly insufferable. I sought help from my parents, but they simply sighed. Who told you to be so bold as to sleep with the young master of their family? I turned to my eldest and second brothers for assistance, but they both avoided the matter. My eldest brother merely patted my shoulder. The Nolan family doesn't raise cowards who abandon responsibility. My second brother patted my back. Little sister, just obediently prepare to be a bride. I was left speechless, unable to utter a single word. It seems there's no escaping this marriage. On the second day after receiving the imperial decree, the Lambert family immediately sent people to deliver the betrothal gifts. Each chest of gifts was brought in, making my eldest sister-in-law and second sister-in-law green with envy. The eldest sister-in-law sighed. When your eldest brother came to propose to me, the betrothal gifts weren't even half of this. The second sister-in-law exclaimed repeatedly, oh my, oh my. Eldest sister-in-law, you got more than I did. My eldest brother and second brother rubbed their noses awkwardly and replied, our family's finances were tight back then, don't you already know that? My father, gazing at each chest of gifts, had a glint of greed in his eyes. If these aren't used as dowries, just imagine how many brothers out on the battlefield could eat their fill. I really couldn't take it anymore. My mother shot my father a sharp glare. Do you dare even think about touching the Lambert family's betrothal gifts? As soon as my mother finished speaking, my father instantly fell silent. A servant from the Lambert family stood before our whole family and began reading the list of betrothal gifts. 1/3 of it consisted of items bestowed by the emperor. It didn't take much thought to figure out that it must have been supplemented by the 2 young ladies of the Lambert family. That damned Imoshio. Didn't he say that the young master of his family wasn't favored? This is what he calls not being favored? Clearly, he's mocking me. When the list of betrothal gifts was read out, the old maid handed the list to me with both hands. Our madam said, this is the betrothal gift for the young mistress. Please take care of it. I held the list as if it were a hot potato. My mother smiled so brightly her eyes curved into crescent moons, and signaled Nanny Nolan to bring tea to serve all the Lambert family servants. The leading old maid was even given a thick cloth pouch. She accepted it with a beaming smile, said a few kind words, and then led the group back to the Lambert residence. The news of my marriage to the eldest young master of the Lambert family had spread throughout the capital, stirring up a storm of gossip. At this very moment, the Turner family spread rumors that Keith Turner's new wife was pregnant while distorting the truth about my divorce from Keith Turner. They claimed that I was physically harmed and unable to bear children, which led to the divorce. How shameless and brazen! The people in the capital loved fabricated stories. The rumors grew more exaggerated as they spread, turning into claims that the eldest young master of the Lambert family married a woman abandoned by the Turner family, one who couldn't even bear children. Such slander was like a dagger to my heart. I was so furious I scratched my head, thinking of ways to break this impasse. But then the rumors shifted again. The latest news is that I, someone incapable of bearing children, had just returned to the capital and turned Keith Turner into a cripple. In no time, the rumor of the Turner family's young mistress being pregnant became one of the 8 great mysteries of the capital. A few days later, the young mistress of the Turner family was sent back to her parents' home, without even taking her dowry along. Initially, I intended to watch the drama unfold, but unexpectedly, I ended up saving the Turner family's young mistress, Charlotte Wade, who was nearly drowned in a pig cage. From Charlotte Wade, I learned that the rumors were deliberately spread by Keith Turner himself. She revealed that after being forced to marry Keith Turner, She found him so repulsive that she tried every possible way to avoid sharing a room with him. Unexpectedly, to save face, the Turner family fabricated the story of her pregnancy. That night, when Keith Turner climbed into her bed, she kicked him to the ground. What a remarkable woman. She's exactly my kind of person. Enraged to the point of losing reason, Keith Turner devised another vicious plan. He aimed to kill two birds with one stone, slandering both my reputation and Charlotte Wade's while greedily seizing her substantial dowry. Truly shameless, the Turner family has no sense of boundaries. With nothing better to do, I decided to make things difficult for the Turner family. After Charlotte Wade recovered from her injuries, she joined my campaign against them. When the Turner family's reputation was nearly destroyed by our efforts, the head of the Wade family stepped in to support the Turners. Charlotte Wade was expelled from her family, and the Turner family handed her a divorce letter, leaving her with no place to go. I arranged for Charlotte Wade to temporarily stay at an estate outside the capital and even found someone to teach her martial arts. Charlotte Wade is a promising talent, she must not go to waste. Finally, the wedding day arrived. Thomas Lambert nervously rode his horse to pick up the bride, accompanied by his uncle Edward Spencer and Prince Henry Windsor. The procession was grand and imposing. The people blocking the door at my house didn't dare cause any trouble, so very quickly, Thomas Lambert was escorted by the two men into my courtyard. After bidding farewell to my parents, I was carried onto the bridal sedan chair by my elder brother. Leaning close to my ear, my brother whispered, "Your husband is so frail, he wouldn't survive a beating. If you get angry, try to hold back." Hold back? Why should I? Seeing my silence, my brother continued to advise, "Our Nolan family cannot afford to offend the Lambert family." Cannot afford to offend? From today onward, I'm part of the Lambert family. If one family member hits another, what's the big deal? If you really want to hit him, make sure it leaves no visible marks. Brother, you truly are a wise man. When I got off the bridal sedan chair, Thomas Lambert held my hand and led me into the residence. His palm was dry and warm. If the situation allowed, I would have loved to throw him over my shoulder. Daring to scheme against me, I absolutely won't let him enter the bridal chamber. After careful consideration, I pretended to obediently complete the wedding ceremony and entered the bridal chamber. Inside the festive room, Nina Lambert and her group were already waiting, causing a ruckus non-stop. It wasn't until near noon that the group finally left. As soon as they were gone, I lifted my red veil, took a few steps to the chair, grabbed the snacks on the table, and started eating. I was starving. After eating and drinking my fill, I started feeling sleepy. Adjusting my headscarf, I lay down to sleep. I had a very long dream. In my dream, I was forced to drink wine by a large dog. The wine passed from its mouth to mine. After forcing the wine on me, it tore apart my clothes. That filthy dog licked and bit me all over, from top to bottom, and even used its claws to scratch me. I raised my hand to hit it, but it stuck out its tongue and licked my hand instead. Disgusting. When I fully woke up, the sun was already shining brightly. Turning my head, I saw Thomas Lambert still sound asleep. Looking down, pulling the blanket aside, a cold chill ran down my spine. Lifting my head, I realized I had fallen into a trap again. On the table, there was breakfast and tea laced with sleeping drugs. This was the second lesson Thomas Lambert had taught me. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I raised my hand and slapped Thomas Lambert hard across the face. His fair complexion immediately turned red. He only let out a soft hum and continued sleeping. I directly shook him awake. Thomas Lambert rubbed his eyes, still drowsy, turned to look at me, and shyly smiled, "My dear wife, you're awake?" I pointed at him, then at myself. "Explain, what happened between us?" Thomas Lambert put on a pitiful expression, "Just like a delicate little wife, I drank too much last night." "My dear wife, you were the one who pinned me down. How could I, while asleep, pin down a drunkard?" "Listen to that, does this sound like something a normal person would say?" Seeing my disbelief, Thomas Lambert covered his cheek, still red from my slap. Why does my face feel so sore? I felt a bit guilty and turned my face away. Stop it, stop it. Blaming myself for being bold as the sky yet willingly stepping into someone else's trap. After tidying up properly, I helped Thomas Lambert to go pay respects. He limped along, leaning on me and groaning the whole way. His injured leg was entirely his own doing. While I was changing clothes, he suddenly hugged my waist. Out of caution, I immediately flipped him over my shoulder, and that's how he ended up with a lame leg. As expected, scholars really are useless. Before we even reached the main hall, we could already hear cheerful laughter from inside. The moment we stepped in, everyone immediately fell silent upon seeing the two of us. Nina Lambert smirked mischievously. Big brother, you're not very capable, are you? Thomas Lambert let out a loud ouch. Don't talk nonsense. The whole room burst into laughter. I glanced around. Besides the family elders, there were only 2 married elder sisters-in-law present. After offering tea, I received a pile of gifts, a pair of heirloom jade bracelets, a gemstone-encrusted dagger, a chest of royal medicinal ointments, and a soft armor woven with golden threads. As for my return gift, it was a scented sachet given to me by the border villagers before I returned to the capital. I thought the Lambert family might be somewhat dissatisfied. Unexpectedly, upon hearing the origin of the sachet, Nina Lambert and my mother-in-law hugged each other and sobbed uncontrollably. May there be no more wars in the world. Yes, exactly. Boo-hoo-hoo. I was rendered speechless by their actions, completely stunned. Thomas Lambert, on the other hand, acted as if nothing surprising had happened, still exclaiming his usual oh dear, and He was supported by me when arriving, and once again when leaving. By evening, using his injured leg as an excuse, he shamelessly refused to leave the bridal chamber. I intended to go to the study to sleep, but he immediately started his incessant oh dear, cries. My dear wife, are you already displeased with me right after our wedding? I said no. Then he began to shed tears. I nodded. He cried even harder. It's my fault, I'm useless. My wife despises me right after our marriage. After saying that, Thomas Lambert started blaming himself again. I truly didn't know what to do with Thomas Lambert whenever he shed his golden beans, so I had no choice but to share the same meal and bed with him. Chapter 4. On the day to return to my parents' house, Thomas Lambert's leg still hadn't healed. Afraid that my parents would find out his injury was caused by me and might take out their whip to punish me, I decided to hide the matter and go back alone. Unexpectedly, before I could even step onto the carriage, Thomas Lambert was already helped onto it first by Imoshu. That Imoshu is cunning to the core, not daring to meet my eyes directly. As soon as I got on the carriage, Thomas Lambert began shedding golden beans. Tears. Dear wife, you won't even let me accompany you back to your parents' house. Is it because I did something wrong? Or is it that your parents were never fond of me? Wife, if there's anything I'm not good at, just tell me, and I'll definitely change. After all, this is my first time being a son-in-law. I'm not used to it yet. I immediately reached out to cover his mouth. All right, you're great. You couldn't possibly be better. As long as he stops crying those golden beans, everything will be fine. The two estates weren't far apart, and before long, the carriage arrived at the general's manor. At the gate, my parents, elder brother, and sister-in-law were already waiting. Thomas Lambert was helped off the carriage by Imoshu, limping step by step toward my parents. On the way to the main hall, my father's cold gaze swept over me, making me feel guilty and unable to meet his eyes. I could only glance around nervously. My mother, on the other hand, was extremely attentive to her new son-in-law. My elder brother gave me a knowing look, then suddenly slapped Thomas Lambert hard on the shoulder, causing him to stumble and fall to the ground. Father immediately kicked my elder brother, sending him sprawling. Unluckily, my brother landed right on Thomas Lambert's injured leg. Thomas Lambert was in so much pain that his face turned red, his eyes welled up with tears, making my mother feel unbearably distressed. She immediately scolded my eldest brother harshly. Even after being helped up, Thomas Lambert remained understanding, gently advising my mother not to be angry and even insisting that the eldest brother surely didn't do it on purpose. My eldest brother was so furious that he could only grunt in frustration. Seizing the opportunity, my mother continued to reprimand him further. I had to pinch my thigh hard to hold back laughter, making sure not to let it show. It seemed that not only I, but even my parents, couldn't resist Thomas Lambert's tactics. My eldest brother was truly miserable. When we reached the main hall, Father asked Thomas Lambert to play chess with him, while I was dragged into the inner courtyard by my mother and sisters-in-law. Leaning in close, my mother whispered mysteriously, "Is the Lambert family treating you well? Especially those two sisters-in-law of yours, I've heard they're difficult to get along with." I replied helplessly, "Who told you that?" Both of my sisters-in-law were so kind that there was nothing to criticize. "I don't care. Just tell me the truth, have they made things hard for you?" my mother asked, narrowing her eyes and lowering her voice. No, on the very first day I greeted them, the elder sister-in-law gave me a soft armor woven with golden threads, while the younger one gifted me a chest full of royal healing medicines. Tell me, which family would have sisters-in-law as thoughtful as that? My mother looked at me with suspicion. Are you telling the truth? Of course, truer than solid gold. My mother let out a surprised, "Oh my, well, that's good. I heard from your father that there's unrest in the southern ridge. Recently, His Majesty has been planning to send troops to suppress the rebellion." Hearing this, I felt a surge of excitement. Will they let me go? My mother shook her head, "That's not certain yet. It's just a rebellion, they might not let you go." I rubbed my hands together repeatedly, unable to suppress my restlessness. It had been a long time since I fought enemies, and my hands were itching for action. Seeing this, my mother lightly slapped my hand and playfully scolded, "You've just gotten married. If you go to the southern ridge, you'll be apart again, it's not ideal at all. 3 years ago, I didn't let you go, but you insisted. Men, when kept waiting too long, might change their hearts." I immediately countered, "So what? If he changes his heart, I'll simply divorce him. How can a man compare to my career?" Unable to persuade me, my mother gave up. That evening, I returned to the Lambert household with Thomas Lambert. Before we left, my father handed Thomas Lambert a precious dagger he had always cherished. Jealousy twisted my face. I had begged for that dagger many times, but my father never agreed to give it to me. My second brother glanced at Thomas Lambert and casually remarked, "Brother-in-law, good luck to you." Thomas Lambert immediately understood the implication. In the carriage, he offered me the dagger with both hands. "Wife, what's mine is yours." I snorted, took the dagger, and silently praised him for being sensible. When the news that the Emperor had assigned me to quell the Southern Ridge Rebellion reached the Lambert household, Thomas Lambert was so furious that he threw a book. Pointing at me, he stammered, you, but couldn't manage to say anything else before storming out of the house with Mo. I felt a bit guilty. The rebellion had nothing to do with me, I had volunteered to go. It was natural for Thomas Lambert to be angry. But I didn't expect him to be this furious. That evening, he returned home, supported by Mo, completely drunk. For the first time, he willingly went to sleep in the study chamber. I lay alone in bed, tossing and turning restlessly until the hour of the rat before finally falling asleep. The next morning, at the hour of the rabbit, I was already at the training camp. With 5 days left until departure, I needed to familiarize myself and train my body in advance. Since I left early in the morning and returned late at night, I didn't pay much attention to Thomas Lambert's behavior. The night before departure, my mother-in-law came to see me of her own accord. Behind her were several maids, each holding something in their hands. She pointed to the maid carrying a medicine box and said, "These are the medicines Nina brought from home, all kinds. Downstairs, there are even herbal remedies." Then she pointed to the cloth in her hand. "The Southern Ridge region has a lot of toxic air, this is fabric to cover your nose and mouth. You must be careful. I felt 70% touched, 30% guilty. Touched because my in-laws, without asking for a reason, still wholeheartedly supported me. Guilty because I had always hidden from them the fact that I volunteered to suppress the rebellion. Outside of Victoria, you are a hero, the pride of the whole family. I am truly very proud of you. I hugged my mother-in-law tightly and solemnly promised, Mother, please rest assured. When I return this time I will definitely give you a chubby grandson. My mother-in-law smiled kindly and replied, all right, I'll be waiting. After seeing her off, I slowly walked to knock on the door of the study chamber. A weary voice came from inside, I'm sleeping. If it's something important, let's talk tomorrow. I had intended to say goodbye, but hearing that, I turned around and left. Farewells are inherently unpleasant. If they are unpleasant, then not saying goodbye directly and keeping the sorrow to oneself is also fine. After turning off the lights to sleep, the door to the room was gently pushed open. I opened my eyes and saw Thomas Lambert sneaking onto the bed. He hugged me and started sobbing. Why couldn't you coax me just a little more? Just coax me a little more, and I'll wake up. I held him close, gently patting his back to comfort him. It's not that I couldn't console him, but I didn't dare to. Because I was afraid I wouldn't have the heart to leave, to part with Thomas Lambert. The Lambert family, and him, were both so kind. If I stayed any longer, I wouldn't be able to leave the warmth of this place. And that is the ultimate taboo for a warrior. Thomas Lambert startled me. After a month apart, the two of us met again at Southern Ridge. Who would have thought that Prince Henry Windsor, of all people, would secretly bring along his family, treating his brother-in-law like a mere eunuch? I pulled Thomas Lambert, dressed in the attire of a palace servant, into my room. Speak, what are you doing here? Thomas Lambert clung to me like adhesive, refusing to let go. I dodged swiftly, and he chased after me endlessly, unable to catch me. Finally, in frustration, he resorted to his ultimate move, one tear shed, one precious book burned. The entire world fell silent in an instant. Thomas Lambert changed his tactics, looking at me earnestly, and said, one day without seeing you, I can't eat or sleep well. Victoria, I truly can't bear to be apart from you. My younger sister said that humans must be brave and dare to pursue love. As soon as he finished speaking, the door to the room was pushed open. Standing outside were Nina Lambert and Chloe Lambert, both speaking in unison, big sister-in-law, big brother is absolutely right. I sighed. Well, the entire Lambert family has gathered. The rebels are not as simple as I thought. This isn't like fighting a foreign invasion, where the enemy is an external force encroaching on our territory. Rebels are civilians killing each other, the ones who die are the common people, and the harm inflicted is upon the nation itself. The leader of the rebels claims to be a descendant of the royal family from the previous dynasty. What a joke, they really know how to make up stories. The previous dynasty collapsed due to its own indulgence and was overthrown by the people. Whether the leader of these rebels is truly a remnant of the former dynasty is unclear, but he's exceptionally skilled at selling dreams to others. Yes, selling dreams, as the eldest sister said. He fabricates visions of the founding father's ambitions, enticing people to follow him. Since our arrival, they've been unusually quiet. Half a month later, the rebels still hadn't left the mountain. Southern Ridge is a treacherous terrain, with steep and perilous landscapes. One man guards the pass, 10,000 cannot advance. Entering the mountain would be disadvantageous for us, so we had no choice but to station our troops at the base and wait for the right moment. Prince Henry Windsor, though inexperienced in warfare, is obedient and willingly plays the role of a lucky charm. A month later, the rebels, driven by a win-or-die-trying mentality, finally emerged from the mountain. They used the elderly, women, and children as their front line, shielding their main forces behind them. He charged forward, but upon seeing the frail commoners, his heart softened, and his hand froze mid-air. Unexpectedly, he fell into their trap, inhaling a significant amount of poisonous powder and fainted on the spot. In truth, he only lost consciousness briefly before waking up, but his entire body was paralyzed, unable to move. Thomas Lambert incessantly chattered in his ear. He was utterly annoyed but couldn't open his eyes, speak, or move his limbs to stop him. Every word Thomas spoke, tinged with a choking sob, etched deeply into his mind. Father-in-law, you're truly formidable, quelling the rebellion like that. My dear wife, when will you wake up? At first, Thomas dreamt of a future where he would awaken. But as time dragged on and there was no change, he even considered drinking poison to die together. What a fool! Nina Lambert scolded him, urging him to stay rational, insisting that they would surely save him. But Thomas Lambert didn't believe her, stubbornly clinging to his resolve to live or die alongside him. In the end, Nina Lambert had to sedate him and toss him onto the bed beside him before leaving. When Thomas Lambert regained consciousness, he used his mouth to feed him medicine. The medicine was bitter, unbearably bitter. This continued for an entire month until, finally, he opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was Thomas Lambert's unkempt, haggard face, covered in stubble. It was so unsightly, so much so that he didn't want to look directly at him. The moment Thomas Lambert saw his eyes open, he leapt up, jumping 3 feet high. All his usual frailty and gentleness vanished entirely. Now, he was as lively as a monkey. 3 months later, I fully recovered. After recovering, of course, I had to return to the capital. Thomas Lambert had resumed his scholarly and bookish demeanor that I adored. But this time, whether there was a reason or not, he kept teasing me. Honestly, if it weren't for Nina Lambert and Chloe Lambert being around, I would have dealt with him long ago. To be truthful, holding back this much is quite frustrating. When I arrived, I rode my horse swiftly, but on the way back, I took my time leisurely. Under the temptation of the delicacies along the road, I gained a full 5 pounds. Upon reaching the capital, the first thing I did was enter the palace to pay my respects to the emperor, and only then did I return to the Lambert estate. I hadn't even had the chance to greet my father-in-law and mother-in-law when Thomas Lambert pulled me straight into the main room. It was rare for him to take the initiative, and he murmured softly, "Wife, you smell so good." I glanced at him and asked, "Lord Lambert, are you planning to declare your lust in broad daylight?" Thomas Lambert paused for a moment, then proceeded to strip completely, not a thread left, and began to overwhelm me from top to bottom. Between husband and wife, how could you use such vulgar words? Outside, the footsteps of the maids quietly faded away. I closed my eyes, letting him do whatever he pleased. 3 years later, I gave birth to a daughter after a long day of pain. Thomas Lambert, who hadn't shed a single tear in years, cried so much on the day of my labor that his eyes were swollen. After I finished my postpartum confinement, he drank a cup of sterilization medicine right in front of the entire family. After drinking it, he wiped his mouth and calmly said, "My dear wife, the pain of childbirth is not something I want you to endure again." I was filled with guilt and didn't dare to lift my head to look at my parents-in-law. My mother-in-law smiled gently and comforted me, "Victoria, if it weren't for you, Thomas Lambert might never have been able to marry a wife." My father-in-law also smiled brightly and chimed in, "That's right, absolutely right." I was so moved that my eyes welled up with tears. The Lambert family truly is a wonderful family. For the past 2 years I had been anxious because I couldn't conceive. But not only did my mother-in-law refrain from suggesting a concubine for Thomas Lambert, she often reminded him to remain devoted to me and not stray. Each time, Thomas Lambert would seriously reply, "Mother, aside from my wife and my books, I have no other thoughts or desires. Having children is good, but if we don't, that's fine too. At most, we'll adopt a child from our relatives to raise." Fortunately, through my relentless efforts, I finally became pregnant and gave birth to a daughter. I had thought that after having 1 child, I could have more, but Thomas Lambert resolutely decided to end that possibility himself. Thomas Lambert never stopped praising me, "My dear wife, you are like an eagle soaring high in the sky, you should not be confined to the inner courtyard because of me. If you wish to go to the battlefield, why wouldn't I follow you? A husband leading and a wife following, it would make for a beautiful tale. I couldn't help but laugh through my tears. When Louis was 5 years old, the emperor passed away, the crown prince ascended the throne, and the borders began to stir with unrest. I, along with my eldest and second brothers, set out for the north. Thomas Lambert, upon hearing of this, personally requested to join us and was granted permission by the new emperor. Accompanying us was also Charlotte Wade, who is now my deputy commander. Thomas Lambert seemed visibly displeased with Charlotte Wade, who was always by my side. Unable to argue, outwit, or defeat her, he spent his days sketching little effigies behind her back. One day, Thomas Lambert brought back an old acquaintance. The moment Keith Turner saw Charlotte Wade, he knelt down and begged her. But Charlotte Wade completely ignored him. I pinched Thomas Lambert, forcing him to confess. He looked at me, his eyes filled with smugness. The Turner family is falling into decline, they need a way out. Keith Turner heard that Charlotte Wade had become a deputy commander, so he shamelessly came seeking reconciliation, hoping to marry her. I immediately poured cold water on his smugness. Did it ever cross your mind that I was once Keith Turner's wife too? Thomas Lambert froze on the spot, stunned for a long moment, before showing clear regret. I smirked coldly. Let him continue his little charade. Keith Turner dared to kneel before Charlotte Wade, but he wouldn't dare kneel before me. Charlotte Wade might overlook his actions out of familial affection, but I am different. If he dares to upset me, I'll make him cry in humiliation. Perhaps this time, Keith Turner is truly remorseful. On the battlefield, blades and arrows show no mercy. He took an arrow meant for Charlotte Wade. It must be said he was rather unlucky. At that moment, Charlotte Wade was squatting down, and the arrow, which was aimed at her head, ended up striking Keith Turner's lower region. The scene was truly tragic. Blood poured endlessly from Keith Turner's lower body. He was completely incapacitated, fulfilling the very rumors he had once spread about himself. Still, he was quite clever. Using his life-saving act and sheer shamelessness to his advantage, he managed to move into Charlotte Wade's room. Thomas Lambert, forced to share a room with me, looked on at the situation with envy. He patted his head, not revealing the truth. Charlotte Wade was a talent I had my eyes on. How could I easily forgive Keith Turner like that? She was a young leader, and to bring benefits to the soldiers under her command, she often made Keith Turner entertain them. Very well. Side story, Thomas Lambert, second sister and third sister, often mock me, calling me a bookworm who doesn't understand true love. I only smile and don't argue. How could I not understand? I understand it very well. The pity is, the person I love already has a husband, and her husband is a philanderer. Before I had time to be sad for long, I heard that she would soon return to the capital with the main army. That night, I was so excited that I stayed up all night. By the time I woke up, she had already entered the palace to receive her reward. Mo Shu, the person I sent to gather information, brought back good news. She had divorced her husband. I was so overjoyed that I read another ancient book for celebration. Eldest sister came to visit and noticed my unusual behavior, so she asked. She used the ancient book to coax me, and I confessed everything. Eldest sister was so furious that she stomped her foot. You're saying that 5 years ago at the border, when you were almost captured, she was the one who saved you? Embarrassed, I nodded. And 3 years ago when you were robbed and nearly injured, she saved you again? I nodded once more. She had just finished speaking when the door was kicked open. How can you be so useless? You've met her twice, and she still doesn't remember your face? I was stunned. True, why didn't she remember me? My elder sister shook her head. Probably because you look too ordinary. I looked in the mirror, how could I be ugly? My elder sister paced around my room, mumbling to herself, this won't do. I need to think of a plan. Her plan was truly brilliant. She told me to throw myself into the situation, using myself as bait. Compromising yourself before marriage? That's not right. My elder sister knocked on my head. Do you want a wife, or do you want to uphold morals? I chose a wife. Sure enough, she took the bait. It even cost 100 silver taels to bribe Imoshu. Ha, she doesn't know that everything Imoshu said was pre-taught by my elder sister. My elder sister told me to act pitiful, to win her sympathy. I followed her advice, and it worked like a charm. This trick could definitely be used again. The golden teardrop trick wasn't bad either, but it was a bit rough on my legs. After every performance, my thighs were bruised from being pinched. A piece of advice for everyone: without strategy, you won't win a wife.